I'm Ariana Blake, 30 years old, born and raised in a wealthy lakeside neighborhood in Bellevue, Washington. My family had everything society associates with success. My father, Dr. Edward Blake, was a neurosurgeon who once made the cover of a medical journal. My mother, Veronica Blake, a corporate attorney who handled lawsuits worth millions of dollars. My brother Graham graduated with honors from Johns Hopkins and is now a resident physician at a major hospital in Seattle. To my parents, he was the child worth being proud of. I was different. From a young age, I was seen as the weird one. While neighborhood kids dreamed of becoming doctors or lawyers like their parents, I was busy dismantling old clocks and wiring sensors into remote-controlled cars. When Graham won a gold medal in the math Olympiad, my mom invited the entire family over to celebrate. When I mentioned I had taught myself C++ programming, she just frowned. You should focus on subjects that actually matter, like economics or political science. Every dinner in our house felt like a performance review. Mom always opened with the familiar question, "What did everyone accomplish today?" Graham always had a long list. Completed his first surgery, received praise from a professor, preparing a presentation for a medical conference in New York. When it came to my turn, the room always went quiet. I wrote a script that optimized app loading time, I'd say each time, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad would set down his fork and shake his head. An app? Those things never last. You should consider something with a future. Graham would glance at me with a pitying smile. I didn't hate him. But I hated how everything in our house always revolved around him. In my bedroom, I taped sticky notes all over the wall. Algorithms, data models, user interface sketches. While Dad hung Graham's medical degrees in the hallway, every tech award I earned was shoved in a drawer. When I was 15, I entered a citywide coding competition and won second place. When the principal called to congratulate us, Mom just offered a faint smile. Yes, she has some quirky interests, but don't worry, we're still guiding her toward law. Their disappointment didn't need to be spoken aloud. It was in every glance, every half-hearted nod, every line that cut deeper than they realized. You have talent, but you still need to grow up before you take the wrong path. I used to think if I worked harder, they'd change. I used to wake up at 5 a.m. to study extra math, work part-time at a computer repair shop, and present the software I built at school tech fairs. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. My parents only ever asked me one thing when I came home. Did you apply to Stanford Law this week? Eventually, I learned to stay quiet, to keep my dreams hidden, and instead of striving for approval, I started to think. Maybe I didn't need them to see. Maybe I just needed to walk forward on my own, even if no one clapped. I'll never forget the night I was 16, the night I realized I would always be a shadow in my own home. That was the day Graham received his acceptance letter from Columbia University Medical School. Mom practically screamed when she opened the envelope, tears falling onto the kitchen counter, like she'd just been told Graham was already named chief of surgery. Dad didn't say a word. He just pulled out his phone and started calling every contact. My son got into Columbia, full scholarship, neuroscience. An hour later, the living room was packed. A long banquet table was covered with food from the most expensive Italian restaurant in town. Family, Dad's co-workers, neighbors, everyone came to celebrate Graham. I stood in the corner holding a glass of orange juice. No one noticed me. What they didn't know was that on the same day, I had just won first place in a statewide software design competition, beating hundreds of students with a healthcare data management app I'd built from scratch over 6 weeks. The principal had personally called our house to congratulate me. Mom picked up. She listened for a few seconds, then replied smoothly, "Thank you. Oh, she's had a few small achievements recently, but she's busy focusing on core subjects. We're guiding her toward law. Yes, Harvard Law is our top choice." I stood there, hearing every word, like cold water had been dumped over my head. I brought my certificate and the new medal out and placed them on the coffee table. right next to Graham's celebration cake. Before anyone could notice them, Mom brushed them aside to make room for a cheese platter. Me? I quietly returned to my room, turned on my computer, and began typing the first line of a new app. If I couldn't make them proud, at least I'd build something the world couldn't ignore. Even the smallest victories were crushed in that house. Every time I pitched an idea or project at dinner, Mom would ask, "But will this help you get into Stanford?" Or Dad would jump in, "Will these little apps help you pass the LSAT?" Graham never outright mocked me, but his silence was worse than ridicule. Anytime I shared something, he'd mumble a vague response and then pivot to describe some surgical simulation he'd done in lab. All eyes would turn to him, and I'd vanish from the conversation. I remember once I was invited to present at a tech conference in San Francisco, fully sponsored with flight and hotel. Dad glanced at the itinerary and said, "That's the same month as Graham's campus visit. Can you reschedule or maybe just go next year? It's not urgent." I didn't go to San Francisco. Instead, I drove Graham to the airport, helped carry his 2 oversized suitcases, then returned home and sat in front of my screen until nearly dawn, hands trembling from anger and disappointment. I didn't stop coding, but I learned to hide everything carefully. The scripts I wrote were saved under aliases. My competition entries were submitted anonymously. I even created a separate email address no one in the family knew, just to receive interview requests and award notifications. They said I was chasing dreams, that I was going down the wrong path, that eventually I'd have to give up that weird little hobby and do something practical. I just nodded, smiled, and kept coding. One night, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. Under the dim kitchen light, I overheard my mom talking to Dad. "Ariana's not doing well. She's withdrawn, always glued to that computer. I'm afraid she's falling behind the others." Dad sighed. "She's not like Graham, she has no clear direction, eventually she'll have to face reality." I went back upstairs without getting my water. But that night, I drafted the very first line of code for my startup. I applied to the University of Minnesota's computer engineering program without telling anyone. I didn't need to. My parents had mapped out my path to pre-law at Princeton since 9th grade, and treated it as a done deal. They never once asked what I wanted. When the acceptance letter arrived, I didn't scream or cry. I just stared at the scholarship offer, like it was a train ticket out of a life I never chose. I tucked the envelope into my drawer, between stacks of code notes and half-finished app sketches. My parents only found out because Mom snooped through my room while I was at school. She nearly lost her mind. "What the hell is this, Ariana?" she snapped, waving the acceptance letter like it was a confession of sin. "I'm going to study computer science," I said without blinking. "You're throwing away your future over a temporary hobby?" Dad jumped in. "Do you know how much we've sacrificed for you?" I didn't argue. I just started packing, quietly, little by little, for the day I'd finally leave. That summer was Seattle's hottest in years. And the first time I felt like I could breathe. College opened up a different world, one where no one knew me as Graham's little sister or Dr. Blake's daughter. There, I was just Ariana, the girl who coded through the night, who brought her laptop to every coffee shop, who argued in class about real-time tech and healthcare. During a freshman group presentation, I met Riley Alvarez. She could talk about blockchain and medical records for 40 straight minutes and still keep the room on the edge of their seats. We were paired on the same team, and during our first study session at the library, I knew if anyone could get me, it was Riley. Unlike me, Riley grew up in a Mexican-American family in Phoenix. Her parents were a nurse and a lab tech. They didn't have much, but they respected their daughter's passion. When Riley told me how her mom once took out a loan just to buy her first computer for coding, I felt an odd pang of envy. In long evenings on the third-floor study hall, we started sketching out an idea we couldn't stop thinking about: a real-time platform to connect patients and doctors, minimizing miscommunication, especially for non-English-speaking patients. Riley called it Bridge. I called it The system where no one gets left behind. Ariana, I'm serious, she said one night, eyes fixed on the whiteboard. This isn't just a class project. This could change the system. I looked at our messy diagrams, APIs, virtual medical charts, AI-driven language interpretation algorithms we were still refining. And, for the first time, I thought, maybe I really can build something that matters. We started coding non-stop, fueled by Riley's memories of her mother misunderstanding treatment instructions, and my own scars from being dismissed. We worked like time was our enemy. Every morning, Riley brought coffee, I brought peanut butter sandwiches, and we dove in like we were running a real startup. We named the platform ClarityNet, a clean, precise name for a technology built to clarify healthcare communication. By sophomore year, we entered ClarityNet in student startup competitions. At the Minnesota State Finals, one judge, a CTO from a major private hospital chain, called it a solution that could save lives. We won first place, and for the first time, I stood on stage, mic in hand, in front of hundreds of students and young investors, speaking my dream aloud. Without needing anyone's permission. That winter, while Graham posted selfies of his first surgery on Facebook, Riley and I sat in our cheap apartment, slurping instant noodles and grinning after a medical center in Minneapolis agreed to pilot ClarityNet for 3 months. No fireworks, no cake, no one clapping, just 2 girls with overheating laptops on their laps and an unshakable belief we were on the right path. We moved all our equipment into a tiny garage behind Riley's aunt's house in the Bloomington suburbs. No air conditioning, a leaky roof when the snow melted, and finicky outlets we had to take turns using. But it was the first headquarters of ClarityNet, the platform we believed could transform the healthcare system. Riley sketched diagrams on a dusty car windshield, while I coded at a wobbly dining table propped up with bricks. We split protein bars, made coffee with a thrift store kettle, and learned to wear 3 layers in winter to cut heating bills. Still, every morning, I woke up breathless with excitement. On the 8th week in the garage, we got an email from a community health center in Rochester, serving many immigrant patients. They wanted to pilot ClarityNet in their intake process, no payment, just a 6-week trial. And that was more than enough for us. I remember the feeling, throat dry, eyes stinging, my hand shaking so much I couldn't hit reply. Riley burst out laughing. This is step 1, then the whole state, then the whole country. We didn't hire anyone right away. Every dollar from our startup award, Riley split it evenly with me. When the Rochester clinic reported a 42% drop in patient intake errors after our trial, I printed that report and taped it to the garage wall, like it was a self-made award. We expanded the real-time language translation feature and built an algorithm that learned user behavior to suggest relevant medical prompts. Riley handled hospital outreach and legal filings. I coded until 3 a.m., often passing out on a plastic chair, with my hand still on the mouse. One night in mid-February, snow blanketing the driveway, my phone rang. It was Grace Liu, one of the judges from our startup competition. I've got an angel investment group in Minneapolis. They want to hear about ClarityNet. We pitched using a cracked old laptop. Riley nailed the numbers, and I demoed our new UI with a live simulation. At the end, there was a pause. Then, the silver-haired woman at the center asked, "Are you two ready to turn this into a real company?" They invested $150,000 for 10% equity. We signed the deal on my 21st birthday. No cake, no candles. Riley bought me a second-hand ergonomic chair. Still the best gift I've ever received. After that round, we rented a tiny office in the cheapest Bloomington business park. The walls were so thin we could hear the lunch bell from the fast food joint next door. But for us, it was our new headquarters, the place where I officially deleted the beta tag from the ClarityNet logo. We hired a part-time developer, Jace, a senior who could scan code once and spot bugs instantly. Then a tech support person, then an intern to handle user onboarding. Within 6 months, ClarityNet was active in 11 clinics across the state. No one in my family knew. And I preferred it that way. Every month, Mom still texted, "How's work going? Have you thought about law school again?" I only replied, "I'm doing fine, tech is still my path." Once, when Dad called asking if I'd be home for Thanksgiving, I was in a meeting with the board of Hennepin Medical, who had just proposed a $60,000 a year deal to implement our platform across their clinics. I said, "This year's a bit packed, maybe next year." I heard him sigh, followed by the usual line, "Busy with what? Your mom said Graham's coming home too." I stayed quiet. Not because I felt guilty, but because I knew, if I told the truth, they wouldn't know how to react. That the weird daughter was about to become CEO of a statewide health tech platform. That I, not Graham, had just wrapped up a call with the hospital's executive director. I hung up, looked around the office. Cables everywhere, whiteboards covered in sticky notes, and a photo of me and Riley standing in front of that garage. I smiled. No applause needed. No need for them to understand. I just needed ClarityNet to keep growing. I got an email from Care Unity Health Network on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Proposal for Regional Partnership Discussion, Confidential." The moment I saw the word confidential, my heart clenched. Care Unity is one of the largest private healthcare organizations in the Midwest, with a network of hospitals and clinics across 4 states. In the email, they proposed a closed-door meeting to discuss acquiring ClarityNet, with an initial valuation between $180 to $220 million, depending on infrastructure assessment. My head spun. Riley was standing beside me, holding her coffee cup. I held up the screen. "We're officially on the radar," I said, unable to hide the nerves. "If they're serious, this would be the biggest offer yet," Riley whispered. A few days later, Care Unity sent over the meeting invite with their investment and strategy team. The attendee list included the CEO, legal counsel, and one name that hit me like a bucket of ice water. Natalie Cooper, Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions. I stared at the name. It wasn't unfamiliar. She was my brother Graham's fiancée, the one the whole family was planning an engagement party for next month. The one who used to sit next to my mom at family dinners, chatting about the weather and organic teas. The one my dad always called a perfect young lady. I had thought Natalie worked in pharmaceuticals. I never looked too closely. But now I saw her photo in Care Unity's internal report. Sharp, composed, seated beside the CEO, while presenting recent acquisition deals. Riley's eyes widened. "Does she know you're the CEO?" "No. All the documents just say A. Blake. They probably think I'm a tech lead or CTO. So what now?" "Now we find out. Who figures it out first?" A week later, I got a formal invitation from my mother. Intimate dinner at Bellevue, celebrating Graham and Natalie's engagement. The gold-foiled lettering felt like a joke. That restaurant was the hardest to book in town. The same place my mom once swore she'd never waste money on a $70 salad. I didn't plan to go, really. But then Dad sent me a text. "You should come. Graham will be happy. Natalie's excited to introduce you to her family. There's someone in tech you might learn something." I almost laughed. The someone in tech he was referring to was the woman currently assuming I was a nameless back-end engineer, while negotiating to buy out the entire platform I'd built. I replied, "I'll be there." That evening, I arrived at Bellevue right on time, wearing a simple black dress, hair neatly pinned. No jewelry, no flash. But every step I took, every glance I held, carried the quiet confidence of someone entering a negotiation no one else knew was happening. Graham greeted me in the lobby, gave a light hug as usual. "Thanks for coming. Natalie's been looking forward to meeting you." I was led to the table, where Natalie stood chatting with my mom and a few distant relatives. She turned as Graham introduced me. This is Ariana, my sister. Natalie reached out to shake hands, polite smile in place. But then her expression froze for a split second when I said, Nice to see you again. Just for a moment her face changed. She recognized me. But she said nothing. Just gave a slight nod. I kept my expression steady, poured myself a glass of water, and started the meal like it was just another family dinner. But I knew. Everything had shifted. To Graham and my parents, I was still the stubborn little sister obsessed with her computer who hasn't landed a proper job. They had no idea that their soon-to-be daughter-in-law was holding a $200 million buyout proposal for ClarityNet. And the person on the other side of that deal? Was me. I sat through the evening under chandeliers that reflected in wine glasses, listening to my mother recount Graham's academic achievements, like he was the sun the world revolved around. I still remember the moment Natalie stood up, holding a glass of red wine, stepping into the center of the dining room. The warm golden light hit her face like she was about to make a typical toast, but I saw it. Her hand was trembling slightly. She glanced around the room. My mother beaming, my father sitting upright with pride, and Graham gently squeezing her hand in reassurance. Natalie took a deep breath. Before we raise our glasses, I'd like to share something related to work. There was a stir in the room. Clearly no one expected her speech to start that way. Recently, my company has been finalizing an acquisition in the healthcare tech space, one of the most innovative and effective platforms I've ever seen. A few polite chuckles followed. My mother nodded, thinking this was just a casual nod to her career. But I kept my eyes on Natalie. And I knew. The company is called ClarityNet, and surprisingly, its founder and CEO. She paused. I didn't look away. Is Ariana, Graham's sister. It was as if all the air had been sucked from the room. No one laughed anymore. I could hear the faint clink of silverware on porcelain from the table behind. Graham turned sharply to look at me, his mouth slightly open as if he'd misheard. My mother's brow furrowed. My father froze. I set my glass down. Stood up. She's right, I said evenly. ClarityNet is the platform Riley Alvarez and I founded when I was 21. It's now used in over 300 healthcare facilities across the country. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. My aunt whispered something to her companion. Someone dropped their phone. Graham still hadn't shut his mouth. My mother, after a long stunned silence, forced a smile. Ariana, what is it you do? An app? Like a medical game or? Natalie cut in, her voice firmer now. Not a game, it's a platform for patient data management, real-time medical translation and HIPAA-compliant security integration. We've been tracking it for over a year. It's about to be acquired for over $200 million. My father gripped the arm of his chair. His knuckles were pale. Graham looked at me like he'd never seen me before. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked, voice hoarse. I looked him in the eye, steady. Because none of you ever really listened. Natalie stepped back, giving me the floor. I looked around the room. Once a battleground for praise, showered on Graham, and polite indifference aimed at me. Now every eye was on me. But not with pity. I spoke slowly, clearly. I spent 6 years building a platform that the healthcare system genuinely needs, not for recognition, but because I believe patients deserve more clarity and safety in their care. A relative stood up. Ariana, are you really the CEO? I nodded. And co-founder. We currently have nearly 70 full-time employees and strategic partners across 3 continents. And Natalie, yes, my brother's fiancée, is leading the negotiations. No one said a word. No one dared. My mother's voice trembled. Why? Why would you keep this from the family? I smiled faintly. Not bitter, just honest. Because to this family, I've always been the one. Off track. The one who wasn't stable. The one who should pursue her passion for now before coming back to reality. I didn't want to hear those things again. especially not while I was creating something real. There was no denying it anymore. No more claiming I was just playing around with computers or chasing a dream. Everything they once dismissed, overlooked, or cast aside to make room for Graham now stood tall at the center of the elegant dinner they thought they were in control of. Natalie raised her wineglass, leaned slightly toward me, and said quietly, "I'm sorry this happened here, but maybe this was the moment it needed to happen." I smiled. I think so too. And in that moment, I was no longer Ariana, the invisible child of the Blake family. The morning after the party, I woke up in my penthouse apartment overlooking Bidemakaska Lake, the cold spring sunlight filtering through the thick glass. My phone was flashing, 13 missed calls from Mom, 5 texts from Dad, and 1 line from Graham. "Sis, can we talk?" I made coffee, took a sip, and waited for the doorbell to ring. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:12 a.m., the bell rang. Graham stood there in a gray hoodie, holding a box of waffles from the shop I used to love back in high school. "I'm not sure if you still eat these," he said with a nervous smile. "But you used to like the strawberry ones." I let him in, silently poured coffee for both of us. He sat at the dining table, eyes scanning the space. The apartment was spacious, minimalist, elegant, clearly far from the unemployed IT tech image the family had painted of me. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, not with anger but regret. I looked him straight in the eye. "Because you never asked with real intention. You and Mom and Dad always treated me like someone lost, someone who needed guidance. None of you believed I could stand on my own." He dropped his head to the table. "You're right." We sat in silence for a while. I could hear the wind outside on the balcony. Graham sighed. Definitely, she's shocked. But not mad. She said I should have known more about my own sister. I said nothing, just poured more coffee. And honestly, Graham continued, I got used to being praised. You were always quiet. I figured you didn't need it, or didn't want anyone to know. I didn't need applause, I said, but I needed respect. And you let them decide my worth by their standards. You stayed silent, and that, too, was a choice. He nodded. A wrong one. He stood up, walked toward the door, then turned back. "If you'll let me. I want to make it right. Not with words. With action. Maybe not all at once, but I will." I looked into his eyes. I didn't see the arrogance of a doctor raised on expectations. I saw a brother, truly, trying to find the sister he had forgotten. "Okay, but this time you have to listen, no justifying." "I'm listening." At noon, Mom called. I didn't pick up. At 3 p.m. Dad emailed with the subject line, "Dinner, family needs to talk." I didn't respond. At 7 p.m. there was a knock at the door. I opened it. My mother stood there, wearing a beige turtleneck sweater, holding a fruit basket, and a book. Forbes. 100 Most Influential Young Women in America. I read a few pages. Didn't understand all of it, but "I'm trying," she said softly. My father followed, quieter than usual, no snide remarks, no questions about grades. They sat across from me on the dark brown leather couch, the kitchen light reflecting off the tension in his forehead. "We were wrong," my mother began. "Not because you made a lot of money," my dad added, hesitant, "but because we didn't see you, didn't want to see. You have the right to choose your own path," Mom continued. "And clearly, you didn't just choose, you built it." I stayed silent, not out of anger, but because after all these years it was the first time I heard those words from them. With no strings attached. No conditions. "We want to start over," Dad said. "From the beginning, not to fix the past, but to understand you." I didn't answer right away. I stood, pulled a color printout from the shelf, clipped neatly. "Memorandum of Understanding between ClarityNet and Care Unity, Preliminary Valuation, $217 million. I placed it on the table, turned it toward them. This is what I've quietly built over the last 6 years. My mother reached out, gently touched the paper, like she was afraid to crease it. We don't deserve to see this first, she whispered, but thank you for letting us. I poured more tea, set 2 almond cookies on a small plate. We'll start over, but this time, I set the pace. No one else takes my story from me again. No one said a word. But I knew, in that silence, something was beginning to shift, slowly, but truly. The agreement between ClarityNet and Care Unity officially closed on a rainy Friday afternoon. Riley and I signed the final contract in a private conference room on the 32nd floor of a glass building facing the Mississippi River. As my pen touched the last signature, a quiet feeling settled in. Not joy, but a confirmation. I had finished the journey no one believed I could take. ClarityNet was valued at $218 million. Riley took on the role of global director, and I became chief innovation officer at Care Unity, the company now expanding its platform into Canada and 3 European countries. But most importantly, I retained control over the core development team. No one forced me out or tried to make me a brand face. I got to be myself, whole and unshaped by anyone's mold. 3 months after the deal closed, I moved into a new riverfront apartment. Minimalist. With clear glass panels facing the city. No statues or awards on the walls. Just a whiteboard, a walnut desk, and the piano I'd dreamed of buying since I was 14. Every Wednesday afternoon, I spent time with a group of high school girls from underserved suburbs. We call it the Debug Club. A space where they learn to code, pitch projects, and most importantly, believe their voices matter. Last week, a girl named Leah, with curly hair, oversized glasses and eyes that looked anywhere but mine, whispered after class. Miss Ariana, do you think someone like me could ever build something like ClarityNet? I smiled, without hesitation. Leah, if you're doing it because you believe in it, then not only can you, you will. Then I handed her a USB with a basic Python setup and notes I wrote when I was 19. Passing it forward. Something I never had, is how I mend those years without belief. As for my family, things didn't change overnight like in the movies. But they did change, slowly, sometimes clumsily. My mom started sending me tech articles, often with the wrong sources, but always with a note. Do you think this could work with your old system? Dad's quieter now, but every week, he calls to ask, is the company doing okay? How's the progress with the international contracts? For the first time in my life, he listens to the whole answer. Graham kept his promise. He's now one of the strongest advocates for the Bridge to Care initiative I'm launching, connecting young doctors to ClarityNet through special access accounts. Natalie, now my sister-in-law, even proposed integrating the platform into the international hospital chain she manages. Family dinners are no longer achievement reviews, instead they're filled with simple questions. What new thing did you learn this week? Any good coffee spots lately? So, who's taking mom to the STEM parent seminar? I no longer crave their approval. No need for applause. No award taped to the fridge. I've gone far enough to understand. Real worth doesn't come from noise, but from persistence. I used to think my goal was to prove them wrong. But I've learned. Success isn't revenge. It's a statement. Quiet, steady, and undeniable. These days, I still wake up at 6 a.m., open my laptop in a sunlit kitchen, and start the day with ClarityNet's dashboard. 82,000 real-time medical interpretations this week. Patient satisfaction rate, 96%. 3 new countries piloting the platform. I have nothing left to prove. I just have work I still believe in. And that's the only win worth keeping. And I choose to keep it. Every single day. My story isn't a journey to earn recognition. It's a journey to recognize my own worth. From the overlooked daughter in my own family, I built a tech platform that's changing how the world delivers healthcare. I learned that silence doesn't mean failure. and persistence is the most powerful language. When you stop seeking approval and start living by what you believe in, that's when you truly succeed. What do you think about Ariana's journey? Was she incredibly resilient, or simply true to herself? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life. I didn't think my parents would ever bluntly say, "Everly, you're just number 2." But they didn't need to say it. Every action over the past 20 years screamed it loud and clear. My sister, Sienna, was the center of the family and everyone around us. And me? I was the empty space no one wanted to acknowledge. If you've ever been treated like a shadow in your own family, you'll understand that feeling. Cold, silent, and never-ending. I used to think I was just overly sensitive, until I saw that every framed photo in the living room was of Sienna, while mine were stuffed somewhere in an old drawer. And that was just the tip of an ocean of unfairness. I'm Everly, 29 years old, and I grew up in a small town in Oregon. My entire childhood revolved around one word: comparison. Sienna, my older sister, is 2 years older than me, and to my parents she was the embodiment of the perfect American dream. Tall, blonde, smart, beautiful, and always smiling at the right moments. Since first grade, she'd won statewide poetry recitation contests, while I was praised for having neat handwriting, but that praise came from my teacher, not my parents. When Sienna landed the lead role in the school's spring musical, my parents printed 50 posters and plastered them all over the neighborhood. They even hired a private photographer to shoot behind-the-scenes photos. That same year, I won second place in the county science fair. My dad simply said, "Good. But don't rest on your laurels." I remember that night clearly. I was excitedly showing off my certificate, while my mom was too busy ordering a custom cake with a picture of Sienna in her princess costume. I stood there quietly, still holding my certificate. It was warm at first, then slowly went cold. By the time we got to high school, the gap between us wasn't just a feeling anymore. It became an undeniable fact. Sienna was the school's beauty queen, cheer captain, and earned a full ride to Stanford. And me, I got a partial scholarship to Oregon State for graphic design. And no one mentioned it at dinner that night. I tried so many ways to be seen. I joined the volleyball team, entered art contests, even took piano lessons, because my mom once said she liked girls who could play an instrument. But every time I tried to rise up, my parents would bring up Sienna as a standard I could never reach. In our living room, there's a large photo displayed above the fireplace. It's Sienna on the cover of a local fashion magazine, right after she graduated. And me? I once sent my mom a photo of me receiving my first design certificate. She glanced at it on her phone, then immediately started talking about how Sienna's new boyfriend was a medical resident. I can't remember the last time my parents hugged me, but I remember clearly how it felt to watch them hug Sienna in her spotless white graduation dress, while I stood a few steps away, holding a camera, waiting to be asked to take a photo. I'm not the kind of person who hates her sister. Sienna never went out of her way to hurt me. But she knew she was the center, and she never did anything to change that. To me, Sienna isn't a bad person. She just got used to being loved too much, while I got used to being overlooked too easily. The worst part wasn't that they didn't love me, it was that they never thought I needed to be loved like she was. The celebration parties, the special vacations, the endless praise my parents posted on social media about Sienna, while I got a token like comment at best. Every time I tried to take a step forward, I was pulled back by my dad's cold stare or my mom's half-hearted smile when she compared me to Sienna. I grew up constantly wondering, would things have been different if I were an only child? What I'm about to share isn't meant to be a complaint. It's so I can finally speak in my own voice, the one I've buried for nearly 3 decades. Because one day, I did something my parents never expected, and everything they built around the image of a perfect family started to crack. And it all began with my wedding. I met Aiden at a graphic design conference in Seattle, when we both raised our hands to speak, right as the moderator spilled coffee all over my laptop. While I was scrambling to wipe the screen, he handed me a napkin and gently said, "If you need a backup presentation, I've got a USB." That was the first time in a long while I didn't feel invisible. We'd dated for 4 years. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Aiden's the kind of man who hates the spotlight but always stands beside you, quietly shielding you from every little hurt. He loved me like I was the most natural thing he'd ever waited for. He liked my messy morning hair, the way I focused when I designed, even the body my mom always called awkward and ungraceful. Aiden proposed on a Friday night, while we were eating cold pizza and re-watching an old animated film we'd seen together on the day we first met. He didn't kneel. He just pulled out a small ring hidden in a cookie tin and asked, "Everly, would you like to help me design the rest of our lives together?" I laughed through tears. I said yes. I thought, maybe this would be the moment my parents would finally be happy for me. But their reaction was silence. I called to share the good news. On the other end of the line, my mom simply said, "Are you sure you shouldn't lose a few more pounds before wearing a wedding dress?" And my dad? He said nothing, just mumbled something about mom having a dentist appointment, and hung up. I tried not to let it crush me. I told myself, they just need time. We sent out wedding invitations, both digital and custom-designed paper versions. I personally went to the post office to make sure everything was sent correctly. My parents' invitation even had an RSVP tracking code. The result? No response, no calls, not a single message. I texted my mom. "Mom, I just want to make sure you got the invitation." She replied 3 days later, simply, "Been busy, I'll check again." After that, nothing. I was exhausted, but I still held on to hope. I sent a few more texts, made a few more calls. Still the same result. Silence. Then I heard from a family friend that my mom was busy working on a wedding mood board for Sienna, even though she wasn't even engaged. I couldn't tell if I was more hurt or angry. I always believed that no matter how much favoritism existed, they wouldn't turn their backs on their daughter's wedding day. But they did. They really did. When I found my wedding dress, a simple A-line design in ivory with light lace sleeves, my mom looked at the photo and sighed. "At least that cut hides your hips." I gave a dry smile. I was used to those comments from her. But this time, it cut deeper. Because this time, I had hoped for something different. A hug, a tear of joy, a "I'm proud of you." Things Sienna always got. And I never did. In the end, the one who helped me prepare for the wedding was Aiden's mother, Margaret. She went over every flower sample, gave input on the seating chart, even fixed the veil netting on my dress herself when I couldn't get it right. She did it all. Without reminders, without complaints, without comparisons. The wedding was held in a small garden on the outskirts of Portland. That summer, the sun was gentle, flowers bloomed along the fences, and wooden chairs lined in 2 rows, draped in white silk. I stood in front of Aiden, watched him hold my hands, his eyes never leaving mine for a second. We exchanged vows as soft music played, and I saw in his eyes a love that was whole. But I couldn't ignore the emptiness in front of me. The 2 front row seats, for my parents, were empty. No flowers. No one. No father to walk me down the aisle, no mother to hug me before the ceremony. I had prepared for their absence, but it still made my heart ache. I didn't cry, I smiled. But I could feel it. Something inside me broke. After the wedding, Aiden and I went to Santa Barbara for our honeymoon. I thought things would settle down. But when we got back, I received a phone call from my mother blaming me. "I can't believe you would abandon your parents like this. No one in the family ever got an invitation." I was quiet for a moment. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up all the mailing history, delivery confirmations, tracking codes, even the read receipt email. I didn't argue. I simply said, "I'm sorry if you felt hurt." And then I hung up. Not because I was wrong, but because I didn't want to explain myself anymore. Not to people who made a choice not to show up on the day I needed them most. That's when I started to understand. They didn't forget. They didn't make a mistake. They weren't too busy. They chose not to be there. And that choice was the clearest declaration I'd ever received from them. I used to think I was used to being the afterthought. The afterthought in family photos. The afterthought in my mother's bragging stories. The afterthought in the trust my parents gave to a child. But I never imagined that even my marriage would be seen as a thorn. Just because I came first. Our engagement party was held in a cozy wooden house that Aiden and I rented in the suburbs of Eugene. Nothing fancy. We didn't need that, but it was warm and sincere enough for anyone present to feel the love. Anyone, except my parents. They showed up late, almost when the party was over. No hugs, no congratulations. My mom wore a shimmering cream-colored dress like she was attending a high-end gala, while everyone else was dressed simply. My dad spent the whole time on his phone, said a few polite words to Aiden's relatives, then retreated into a corner. I was talking to Aiden's aunt when I caught sight of my mom leaning in close to my dad, whispering something into her phone. Her face was tense, her eyes glanced at me like I'd done something terrible. Then I heard a faint crying voice from the phone. A woman sobbing with hurt and frustration. I didn't need to hear more to know who it was. Sienna. My mom whispered. I know you didn't expect her to rush like this. No, it's not your fault. Her voice sounded like she was comforting a child who just had their toy taken away. Then I heard her say, "It should have been you first." I turned away, my heart felt heavy. No one asked why I stayed quiet for the rest of the party. No one asked. Maybe because they already knew. Or pretended not to. They didn't want to ruin the mood. But I was already ruined inside. That night, back home, I sat in the living room, gripping a wine glass with a bit of red left. Aiden walked in, gently placed a hand on my shoulder. I heard everything, he said, his voice low. You're not imagining it. I just nodded. I couldn't say a word. Your parents, they can't stand the fact that you're getting married before Sienna, can they? He asked. I closed my eyes, swallowed the truth like a bitter pill stuck in my throat. Yes, they couldn't stand the fact that the second-tier daughter found happiness first. They had spent their whole lives building a family script where Sienna was the star, and me? I was the supporting role. Not allowed to shine too brightly, and now, I dared to stand up. Dared to wear a wedding dress before Sienna. Dared to smile in happiness without needing them. That was an unforgivable sin. In the weeks that followed, while Aiden and I were busy with the final preparations for the wedding, I stopped expecting anything from my parents. I stopped texting, stopped checking in, I just didn't have it in me anymore. Each time I laughed during cake tastings with Margaret, Aiden's mom, was another time I swallowed the bitter truth that my own mother would never do those things with me. Margaret said I looked radiant like the morning sun in a misty forest when I put on my wedding dress. My mother? She sent one line after seeing the photo. It's okay. Don't wear heels that are too high, your legs are already thick. It didn't hurt anymore. I felt numb. And in that numbness, I began to realize I didn't need them the way I once thought I did. The wedding still happened. Without my parents. Without Sienna. Without a single glance from my side of the family. Just friends, Aiden's relatives, and the people who chose to stand by me, who chose to see me. Aiden walked me down the aisle as soft violin music played. He didn't take his eyes off me. As if every light in that day came from just one person. Me. But in the moment we exchanged rings, I couldn't help but glance at the 2 empty front row seats. Seats for the people who gave birth to me, raised me, and then abandoned me with silence and lopsided affection. I didn't cry, but in my heart, there was a quiet farewell. Goodbye, Mom and Dad. Goodbye to the role of the good daughter in the family play I was never given a line in. Our honeymoon in Santa Barbara ended with a beautiful sunset on the beach, as Aiden held my hand and whispered, "Do you feel like we've just stepped into another life?" I smiled and nodded. At that moment, I truly believed all the bad things had been left behind. I thought I had let go. But my family hadn't let go of me. 3 days after returning to Portland, my phone rang while I was unpacking. It was my mother. Everly. Her voice was cold as steel. I can't believe how ungrateful you've become. I froze. What? You never sent the invitations. Your father and I received nothing. You cut your family out of your big day and acted like nothing happened. Is this how you repay the people who gave you life? It took me a few seconds to gather myself. What are you talking about? I sent the invitations 2 months ago. I even checked the confirmation codes. Both email and printed copies were successfully delivered. You're making up stories to avoid responsibility, she snapped. You wanted to embarrass us. You wanted to create a narrative where your parents are the villains and you're the poor little victim. My hands trembled, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I have proof. I kept every receipt. I even saved the system email confirming the invitation was opened. I heard a scoff through the phone. Where did you learn this blame game? From your in-laws? Or are you trying to whitewash the fact that you shoved your sister out of the spotlight? It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Now I understood. All the coldness, the blame, the cutting tone. None of it came from being left out. It all came from one single truth. I got married before Sienna. And that was unforgivable. I never wanted the spotlight, I just wanted my parents to be there, I said. I don't understand why that simple wish turned into a crime. You know exactly why, my mother said, her voice sharp and deliberate. You've always been jealous of your sister, since you were little. And now you're using your wedding to polish your own image, to smear hers by making this family look like a joke. I was speechless. Each word from her landed like acid on my heart. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, I said, my voice breaking. I just had my own wedding, and you're punishing me because I'm not Sienna? No one's punishing you, my father cut in from the other end of the line. His voice was flat, indifferent. But if you choose to go your own way, don't expect the family to just stand still while you make things up. I hung up. No screaming, no throwing things. I just sat there, in the quiet room, still in my pajamas. Outside the window, the rain had started to fall. I opened my laptop and pulled up everything I'd saved. The USPS delivery receipts. A screenshot of the RSVP confirmation code. The automatic read notification from the email address my mother still uses. The texts I sent, left unanswered. I sent all of it in an email again, CCing Aiden. Not to convince them, but to remind myself. I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining things. I did everything right. And they're twisting the truth, like they always have my entire life. That evening Aiden came home to find me sitting silently. He didn't ask anything. He just sat beside me and held my hand. A while later he said, "They don't have to say you're not good enough anymore, because they've shown it in everything they've done." I rested my head on his shoulder. "I'm so tired, Aiden," I whispered. "They always find a way to make everything my fault, ever since I was a kid. It's not your fault, they just can't handle the fact that you're no longer living in someone else's shadow." The next morning, I got a text from Aunt Emma, my mother's younger sister. "Everly, I know you sent the invitation, I saw your mom open it, they just pretended they didn't." "I'm sorry." My heart clenched, a cold shiver ran down my spine. They knew, they got the invitation, and they made a choice not to come. Then they lied, gaslit me and painted me as the jealous, disrespectful daughter stirring up trouble. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt disgusted. Disgusted at how smoothly they could lie, how effortlessly they could twist reality and make you question your own memory. I looked at Aiden. I think, maybe it's time I walk away from this family play for good. He just said, "No one deserves to drown for trying to live honestly." I hadn't even taken down all the wedding invitations from the bulletin board in my office when news of Sienna's wedding flooded the family group chat. A photo was posted on Facebook by my mom. She was standing beside Sienna, both of them glowing under the lights of a fancy bridal boutique in downtown Seattle. The caption that came with it was a knife straight to the heart. Finally getting to walk with my beloved daughter on her special day, moments that can never be replaced. Moments that can never be replaced. It was like she was shouting in my face. Your wedding meant nothing. My dad wasn't any more subtle. He posted a photo of them touring a luxury resort by Lake Chelan, scouting for wedding venues, with a proud caption. Wedding plans are coming together for our perfect daughter. Happiness is seeing your child shine where she truly belongs. They hadn't forgotten me. No, they were deliberately erasing me from the story. I hadn't planned to say anything, I really didn't. I tried to stay silent. But then Aunt Emma, the one who messaged me after my wedding, called. She whispered like she was afraid someone might overhear. Everly, I need to tell you, they're telling the relatives that you made it all up, that you never sent the invitations, that you're speaking badly about the family out of jealousy towards Sienna. I sat frozen by the window. The wind outside howled, but it couldn't match the cold I felt inside. Do you believe me? I asked. Of course I do, she said, but some people, they don't need proof, they just need someone to speak louder. I wasn't making things up, I was just telling the truth. But the truth has a way of stripping people bare, and not everyone can handle the light. A week later I got a message from my cousin Jake, the one who had come to my wedding and cried during the ceremony because he'd never seen two people love each other so genuinely. He wrote, Aunt and Uncle are mad at me for not going to Sienna's wedding. I can't stand how they treat you. Don't think everyone believes them, Everly. Some of us see it. I didn't expect support, but when it came, it felt like warmth in the middle of a cold winter. And I started to realize I wasn't alone. At a gathering with Aiden's side of the family, my Aunt June said bluntly, Do your parents really think people will forget they didn't show up to your wedding? They're wrong, everyone remembers. And no one agrees with what they did. It seemed the more they tried to cover things up, the more absurd it all became. Each wedding dress photo, every glowing caption, every cheerful status, only made the emptiness inside them more obvious. I didn't need to say much. When someone asked why my parents didn't come to my wedding, I gave the same answer every time. Because I got married before Sienna. No dramatics, no complaints, just one bare truth, and whoever heard it understood 100 things behind it. But the truth makes people uncomfortable. My mom called after hearing that some relatives declined to attend Sienna's wedding. She didn't check in. Didn't try to make peace. She attacked. You're destroying this family, Everly. You're turning people against your sister with your selfishness. I sighed. You're blaming me because you chose not to come to your own daughter's wedding? Don't play the martyr, my mom snapped, her voice full of fury. You've always been jealous of your sister. Now you're trying to make everyone think I'm a bad mother. I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. But I kept my voice steady. Mom, I don't have to make anyone think anything. They see it for themselves. You, she hissed. You're going to regret tearing this family apart. I looked over at Aiden, who was in the kitchen pouring coffee. He looked at me, said nothing, but his eyes were full of quiet strength. I turned back to the phone. No, Mom, the only thing I regret is believing that family love was unconditional. And I hung up. I never thought I'd reach the day I would stand up to my parents. Not in my imagination, not in all the scripted speeches I ran through in my head while crying alone. But it was real. My voice trembling, my hands shaking, and all the wounds I had spent my whole life swallowing finally rising to the surface. The call came from my mom. No sugarcoating this time. She went straight to the point. You need to stop, Everly, before you completely ruin this family's reputation. I heard my father's voice on the line too. He was probably sitting next to her. He muttered, Unbelievable how shameless this girl has become. I pressed my lips together, my palms were sweaty, but I no longer wanted to stay silent. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm just telling the truth. People are distancing themselves from you not because of what I said, but because of what they saw you do. Oh, here we go again with the pity act, my mom snapped. You've always loved playing the victim. I let out a dry laugh. Well then, today I'll speak as a real victim, Mom, and I want you and Dad to hear me out. Without cutting me off, without brushing me aside. Silence on the other end. I took a deep breath. Do you remember when I was 10? On my birthday, I invited 4 friends over to our house. You said yes, but on the day, you canceled everything because Sienna had a last-minute kids modeling shoot. You told me birthdays come every year, but photo shoots don't happen every day. No response. And in 12th grade, I invited you to my graduation ceremony. I was the only one in my friend group without a family member there. Because you were taking Sienna to try on her prom dress. You said, who schedules 2 things on the same day? That's the school's fault, not mine. My dad's voice cut in. What's the point of bringing all that up now? To let you know how it felt for me, I burst out, my voice cracking. To let you understand what it was like to grow up in Sienna's shadow. I couldn't stop now. Memories rushed back like a flood breaking a dam. When I made the scholarship list for the state university, Mom, you just said, well, that saves us money. Meanwhile, when Sienna got her Stanford acceptance letter, you threw a buffet party. When I landed my first job at a design firm, you said, how are you going to live on that salary? That tuition money was wasted. But when Sienna quit her 3rd job in a year, you said, she needs time to find her passion. My mom finally spoke, her voice cold and sharp. So what, you're trying to say we're terrible parents? No, I said clearly, word by word. I'm saying you never truly saw me. You never loved me the way you loved Sienna. I heard a sharp exhale on the other end, followed by my mother's bitter laugh. You know what, Everly? Your father and I always tried to treat you fairly, but you chose to feel left out. Maybe because you're not as talented, not as remarkable as your sister, so this is how you get attention. My heart clenched. This is why I never spoke up before, I whispered. Because every time I did, you made me feel like I was crazy, like I was just too sensitive. But no, I've had enough. My dad cut in, his voice heavy. You should be ashamed. We gave you life, raised you, and this is how you repay us? By humiliating the family in front of our relatives? I let out a painful laugh. No, Dad, I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm just done being the backdrop for Sienna to shine. I'm done staying silent. A long silence followed. Then my mother spoke again, her voice sharp and cold. Maybe you just can't handle not being the center. You've always been the loser, Everly, and now, you're losing your mind because your sister's about to have a perfect wedding, and all you had was some backyard party no one remembers. I felt something inside me crack. But this time, instead of breaking, I felt free. You're right about one thing, I said. You raised me. But you also taught me a lesson I don't think you ever intended, that I deserve respect, even if I'm not your idea of the perfect daughter. Then don't come back when everything falls apart, my mother hissed. We have nothing left to say. You're right, I replied. And I don't need anything more. I hung up. And for the first time in years, I didn't cry. Not for them. Not for the things they couldn't give me. I just felt light. I thought that after such a fiery conversation with my parents, things would quiet down, or at least they would understand that I was no longer the girl who blindly obeyed, who stayed silent and swallowed the pain. But I had underestimated Sienna. 3 days after I cut ties with my parents, I got her first message. Long, flowery, dripping with fake righteousness. Everly, I feel sorry for you. You've let jealousy cloud your judgment so badly that you've destroyed the relationships in our family. This was supposed to be a time for unity, for celebration. But you chose resentment. I read every line like I was reading a public indictment, authored by someone playing the holy victim. You've always wanted to be the center. Even during my wedding, you couldn't stay out of it. Do you know how many times Mom has cried because of you? I laughed, not because it was funny, because the performance was so ridiculous it was almost theatrical. You should know I've always loved you even when you constantly tried to prove you were better than me. But doing that doesn't elevate you, Everly, it only makes you smaller. No check-in, no attempt at understanding. Just carefully crafted blame, smugness, and condescension. She was still the same. Sienna, standing on her moral pedestal, always looking down on me. I didn't respond. I had no words left to waste. I just quietly blocked her number. But Sienna wasn't done. That evening, while I was in the kitchen cooking, Aiden called out from the living room, his voice oddly amused. Ever, you need to see this. I wiped my hands and walked out. He was holding his phone, half surprised, half entertained. Sienna messaged me. He held up the screen. The message opened in the most formal tone imaginable. As Everly's older sister and someone who has always cared deeply about the well-being of our family, I feel compelled to speak up. I rolled my eyes. Aiden nodded. Oh, there's more. The message continued. Aiden, I believe that as her husband, it's your responsibility to help Everly reflect on her behavior. Family is foundational, and if someone is tearing it apart, their partner should help guide them back. Aiden chuckled, tilting his head at me. She's basically telling me to fix you. I shook my head. Who does she think you are? He pulled me down beside him and kept reading. Everly tends to be emotionally reactive and extreme. She doesn't understand that. I've never competed with her. I've simply done my best. If that makes her feel inferior, then that's something she needs to work on internally. My jaw dropped. That level of self-congratulation is almost artistic. Aiden shrugged. This is my favorite part. He pointed to the final paragraph. You may not realize it, but maintaining good relationships with successful family members like myself can be beneficial long-term. Career, networking, opportunities. Don't let Everly sabotage that for both of you. I was stunned. She's trying to bribe you with her status? Aiden nodded, eyes full of sarcasm. She thinks I'd trade my marriage for a couple of networking events. He laughed. She really doesn't get me at all. I looked at him, the one man who had ever seen me, not a flawed version of Sienna. And a warm, certain feeling rose in my chest. So, you're not tempted? I teased, eyes gleaming. Aiden wrapped his arm around me, kissed my forehead. She just made me love you more. That night, we sat on the porch, sharing a glass of wine, reading the messages again like they were scenes from a bad comedy. But deep down, I felt peaceful. Sienna had played her final card. And lost. She used to be able to make me doubt myself. But now, her manipulations no longer work. No one in my life is affected by that polished mask anymore. Aiden didn't reply to Sienna with anything dramatic. He simply sent one line. Thank you for your concern. I will always support Everly's happiness, not control it. For anything related to her, please speak with her directly. Have a good day. A few minutes later, Sienna sent one last message. Knew she'd poisoned you. When it all falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you. I hit delete. And for the first time in a long while, I looked up at the night sky and felt like there was no shadow clinging to my back anymore. Not long after Sienna's failed attempt to manipulate Aiden, I started to feel subtle shifts within the extended family. But this time, they weren't coming from me. Aunt Emma called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice low, like she was trying to avoid being overheard. Everly, it looks like your family is launching a counterattack. I frowned. What do you mean, counterattack? They're calling up relatives one by one, telling them you deliberately didn't send wedding invitations, that you made everything up to play the victim. They're labeling you and Aiden as the ones who tried to ruin the family's image. Your mom, she's rewriting the whole story. I wasn't surprised. But I wasn't hurt anymore either. At that point, all I felt was cold. Do you believe me? I asked. My voice so soft it felt unfamiliar even to myself. I don't need to believe you, Aunt Emma replied immediately. I saw it. I've seen it for years. And it wasn't just Aunt Emma. Within a week, I got messages from relatives I thought would stay silent forever. A message from Aunt Martha, who never liked conflict. Everly, I want you to know. Your parents favoring Sienna wasn't something only you noticed. We all saw it. No one dared to say anything. Uncle Rick, my dad's younger brother, texted. Your father did the same thing at my daughter's wedding, tried to push Sienna as the maid of honor without even asking my kid. They're used to Sienna being the center of everything. A cousin of mine, someone I used to be close with in middle school, messaged to apologize for staying silent at a family party years ago when she saw me being dismissed. Just because I didn't wear the dress my mom wanted. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm, but for once, I wasn't at the center of it. For the first time in my life, the truth was speaking on its own, through many different voices. I didn't have to shout anymore. And as for my family, they started scrambling. I heard my parents called Uncle Barry, who had been assigned to be the MC at Sienna's wedding, to clear things up and assure everyone it was all a misunderstanding. But Uncle Barry, who had witnessed my mom humiliate me at Christmas dinner 4 years ago because I refused to crash diet, flatly refused. Don't ask me to say something I don't believe, he said. I'm not going to that wedding, I'm not playing a part in another performance. The word spread fast. Some guests canceled their RSVP. Others messaged me privately, saying they wouldn't take part in what they called a champagne-soaked charade dressed in designer gowns. I didn't ask anyone to take my side. I didn't need to. The truth, once seen clearly, chooses its own allies. Aiden walked into the room while I was reading a message from my aunt, who said she was canceling her anniversary party because she didn't want to share the venue with Sienna's wedding. He looked at me and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I nodded, then shook my head, then gave a half smile. I'm okay. In a strange way. I thought I'd feel vindicated. But I don't. I just feel relieved. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. You don't need revenge. They're exposing themselves. A few days later, at a small gathering with Aiden's paternal family, I was told a story that made me laugh out loud. At a pre-wedding dinner, someone apparently asked, "Where's Everly? Why wasn't she invited?" My mom lost it. "Don't mention that girl again, she chose to walk away from this family," my mother snapped. In front of 20 people. The silence afterward was described as heavy as lead. From a woman obsessed with appearances, my mother had now become a topic of gossip. Not for her glamour, but for the rage she could no longer hide. My father tried to shift the blame to a misunderstanding with the email address, claiming I'd sent the wedding invitation to the wrong place. But the relatives scoffed. Many had used the same email since 2003. The more they tried to cover it up, the more they exposed themselves. The more they tried to paint Sienna in gold, the more they highlighted the other daughter, the one they ignored, excluded, and denied. Sienna might still have her extravagant wedding, but it would be missing genuine glances. Missing real hugs. And heartfelt blessings. I already had those, in a small garden wedding, with the man who saw me not for who I should be, but for who I am. That afternoon I stood in front of the mirror in our little kitchen, holding a steaming cup of tea. Through the glass door, sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow on the corner of the table, where Aiden sat flipping pages of a book, eyes calm and peaceful. I looked at him. The only person who never asked me to be a better version of someone else. And I realized, I had come home a long time ago. It just took walking through all that pain to know it. In the days that followed the storm from my family, everything began to quiet down. Not because they apologized or changed, but because I stopped waiting for them to. It was the first silence I had ever chosen, and it felt so light, it was almost unfamiliar. I no longer needed to prove anything. No need to say, I sent the invitation. No need to scream just to be heard. No need to recount the past again and again to get someone to admit I had been treated unfairly. The truth had spoken for itself. And I no longer had to be its keeper. My parents still lived in the same house, with that fireplace lined with framed photos of Sienna, I don't know how many people still believed them, or how many excuses still held up. But I knew one thing for sure. I had stepped off the stage they built for me long ago. I remembered the last conversation I had with my mother, her voice tense, clinging to the last threads of pride. "You can hate me, Everly, but I raised you with everything I knew." I didn't respond. Because I understood. Sometimes, people can love. But love in a way that hurts you for life. I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her anymore. I started spending more time with the people who truly wanted to be there for me. Weekend coffees with Aunt Emma, who still called me Little Ev like when I was a kid, without comparing me to anyone. Evenings cooking with Aiden, telling each other silly stories from our day and laughing until tears came over something trivial. I started writing again. Something I had given up because my mom once said, "No one makes a living off words." The pages were no longer soaked in tears but filled with peace. Aiden printed my first piece, framed it, and hung it by my desk. He said, "This is where you really belong, not in anyone's shadow." I looked at him, smiled, and said, "For the first time, I feel enough." He didn't say anything, just held my hand. But in his eyes was a world of love that needed no explanation. Sienna still had her wedding, from what I heard, still grand, still picture perfect. But more seats were empty than expected. People said my mom didn't smile as much as usual. And Uncle Barry pulled out as MC at the last minute due to a sore throat. I didn't care. I didn't follow up or look into it. I wasn't part of that story anymore. I wasn't the little sister chasing after a crown never meant for me. I am Everly, Aiden's wife. A regular woman. Flawed, unglamorous, but real. And for the first time in my life, I don't need love from people who don't know how to love me. I just need one person who truly sees me. And Aiden has done that since day one, back when I was wiping coffee off my keyboard. That evening, as I leaned on his shoulder on our porch, Aiden asked, "If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No. Because if I didn't go through all of it, I wouldn't know who's real. And I wouldn't have realized I could love myself too. I looked up at the starry night sky, the cool wind brushing my shoulders. For the first time, my chest didn't feel hollow. Not because someone filled it for me, but because I stopped trying to become someone else just to be loved. And that is true freedom. My story isn't just about being abandoned at my wedding. It's about walking out of the shadow of favoritism and lifelong hurt. I've learned to let go of expectations that were never going to be met, and instead to love myself in the way my family never did. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It speaks for itself over time. And sometimes, freedom doesn't come from forgiveness, it comes from no longer begging for love where it doesn't exist. What do you think of Everly's story and the way she stood up to her family? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional family stories and meaningful life lessons. I used to think family was the safest place. But then I realized that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who push you away the most. I lost my father when I was 8, but it turned out that wasn't the biggest loss of my life. What truly broke me was how quickly my mother filled that void, not with love, but with a stranger. My father passed away after a long illness. When he was alive, he was the only person in the world who made me feel unconditionally loved. He used to call me the little light of our family, always lifting me onto his shoulders and spinning me around when he came home after a long day at work. But those happy days ended too soon. One autumn morning, I woke up to find my mother sitting motionless on the chair, eyes red, hands clutching the death certificate, and from that moment on, my world completely changed. At first, I thought my mother would grieve for a long time. But just a few months later, she brought a new man into our home. His name was Victor. Short hair, a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a cold handshake when my mother introduced me to him. "Ruby, this is Victor. Victor, this is my daughter." I remember that moment clearly. Victor just nodded, glancing at me as if I were an unnecessary piece of furniture in the house. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I didn't know if my mother noticed or if she simply chose to ignore it. It didn't take long for me to realize that Victor didn't want me there. He didn't have to say it outright. It was in the way he sighed whenever I entered the room, the way he frowned if I dropped a spoon, the way he took my father's seat at the dinner table. At first, I tried to tell my mother. I told her I didn't like Victor, that he wasn't friendly. But she just sighed. "You have to understand, Ruby. I need someone too." I didn't understand. Wasn't I here? Wasn't I her family? Little by little, I became an outsider in my own home. Victor had rules. Rules I could never keep up with. No toys in the living room. No talking during meals. No TV for too long. If I made a mistake, he would look at my mother, waiting for her to say something. But she stayed silent. She didn't protect me anymore. And then one day, I realized I was no longer my mother's priority. I was just a part of the past she wanted to leave behind. I quickly learned one thing: Victor always had something to complain about when it came to me. If I sat in the living room, he said I was in the way. If I went to my room, he said I wasn't trying to be part of the family. If I forgot to clean something, he would shake his head and look at my mother as if I were some enormous burden she had brought into his life. At first, I tried to follow every rule. I cleaned up right after eating. I tried not to make noise. I nearly disappeared in my own home. But nothing ever pleased him. And my mother? She said nothing. I remember one winter evening. We were having dinner, a tense meal as usual. I kept my hands away from the table's edge, trying not to draw any attention to myself. But then, just one moment of distraction, and I accidentally knocked over my glass of water. The water spilled across the table, running toward Victor. He pushed his chair back, standing up, his eyes burning with anger. "Ruby, can you be more careful?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. I'm sorry," I stammered, my hands trembling as I grabbed a napkin to clean it up. Victor crossed his arms, looking at me as if I were completely useless. "Sorry doesn't dry my pants, Ruby. How many times now? You're always this clumsy." I looked at my mother, hoping she would say something. Just one word, just once. I wanted her to stand up for me. But she stayed silent, setting her fork down and staring at her plate. Something inside me broke. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. "You need to teach that girl some discipline. I can't live like this." Victor's voice was sharp. "You're being too harsh. She's just a child." "A child?" "She's 8, Sarah. She's not a baby you can coddle anymore." "I'm serious. If you can't make her grow up, then I will." I didn't hear my mother argue back. In the months that followed, I felt like I was living in a box that kept shrinking. Everything I did was wrong. Every mistake was magnified. And then things got worse. My mother got pregnant. When she told him the news, I saw Victor smile for the first time. A real smile. But it wasn't for me. "That's wonderful, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "We're going to have a real family." A real family. Those words stabbed straight into my heart. Wasn't I part of this family? But then I realized. Victor had never seen me as family. When my baby sibling was born, I tried to love them. A tiny, innocent baby. They didn't deserve the same coldness I had endured. I wanted to believe that their arrival would bring us all closer. But Victor only grew more irritated with me. He snapped more often when I was near the baby. One night, I overheard a conversation I wish I had never heard. "Sarah, we can't keep doing this. Not this again. The baby needs everything, money, attention. And Ruby? She's not even my child. I can't keep spending money on a kid that isn't mine." "Victor. You know I'm right, Sarah. It's time to think about our future, our real family." My mother didn't say anything at first. Then she sighed. "Where do you think we should send her?" I felt my whole world collapse. The day I left home, it was colder than usual. My mother didn't hug me, she didn't cry. She didn't try to comfort me. She just stood there, gripping the straps of her purse like she wanted this to be over quickly. Victor didn't even bother coming to the door. The one who took me away was Aunt Margaret, my mother's younger sister. I didn't remember much about her, except that she visited during the holidays, always dressed neatly, and never laughed for too long. As I climbed into her car, my mother said just one thing. "Listen to your aunt." Then she turned away. I sat in silence the entire ride. Aunt Margaret drove without saying a word, only adjusting the rearview mirror from time to time. When the car turned onto a narrow road and stopped in front of a house with a white picket fence, I realized that everything was about to change forever. Aunt Margaret opened the car door and looked at me sternly. "Ruby, get out." Slowly, I stepped out, pulling my small suitcase behind me. "There are a few rules in this house," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "No laziness, no backtalk, no complaints. If you follow the rules, things will be easier." I just nodded. "Speak up." "Yes, Aunt Margaret." Aunt Margaret wasn't one to yell, but every word she spoke felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. On my first day, I made a mistake. I forgot to wipe the dining table after dinner. Aunt Margaret didn't shout, but her stare sent a chill down my spine. "In this house, everyone has responsibilities. If you don't learn discipline, there's no place for you here." Silently, I grabbed a cloth and wiped the table. The following days weren't any better. Aunt Margaret had a long list of things I wasn't allowed to do. No leaving my bedroom door open too long. No sitting idly before finishing homework. No asking for help unless I had tried at least 3 times on my own. The worst part was school. If I got a B, Aunt Margaret would place the test on the table, cross her arms and say, "Isn't good enough. If you don't try harder, then your mother was right to send you away." Every time I heard those words, I felt smaller, as if I truly was a useless child nobody wanted. But I didn't cry. I understood that here, crying wouldn't change anything. Gradually, I learned to stay quiet, learned to hide my emotions, learned to disappear from my own life. I didn't know how long I had been holding it all in. Didn't know how many nights I had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my mother ever thought about me. But I remember the exact moment I couldn't take it anymore. It was a Saturday afternoon. Aunt Margaret was outside trimming the bushes, and I was cleaning the kitchen like always. On the counter, next to the fruit basket, her phone was charging, the screen lighting up a few times with incoming messages. It felt like it was calling to me. I tried to ignore it. Tried to remind myself that I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. But the thought wouldn't leave me. Maybe my mother would answer. Maybe she missed me. I took a deep breath, glancing out the window to make sure Aunt Margaret was still busy. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had never forgotten. The line rang. Once. Twice. My heart pounded harder. Then my mother answered. "Hello?" I opened my mouth but no words came out at first. "Mom?" Silence. A long pause. Then her voice came, cold and distant, as if I were a stranger who had dialed the wrong number. "Ruby, why are you calling?" I bit my lip, tears welling up before I could stop them. I miss you. "Ruby, I told you. You can't call me anymore." I choked on my breath. "But, why? I'm still your daughter." She sighed. The sound of it twisted something deep inside me. "You need to move on, Ruby. You have to learn to live with Aunt Margaret." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "Mom, please, let me come home." "No." Her voice turned sharp. "You don't have a home here anymore. Don't call again." The line went dead. I stood frozen, phone still clutched in my hand, breath caught in my chest. She had hung up. She had truly cut me off. I don't know how long I stood there, but when the kitchen door swung open and Aunt Margaret's voice rang out behind me, I knew I had just made the biggest mistake. "What do you think you're doing with my phone?" I turned around, my throat tightening with fear. Aunt Margaret strode toward me, snatching the phone from my hand, her eyes like ice. She scrolled through the call history, then scoffed in disgust. "You stupid girl, you still don't get it, do you?" I clenched my fists, trying to hold back my tears. "My mom, she's just angry." Aunt Margaret let out a short, bitter laugh, but there was no amusement in her eyes. "Angry? No, Ruby, she abandoned you. You're not her problem anymore." Her words cut deeper than any knife. But the punishment wasn't over. "From now on, you're not allowed to touch my phone. No TV, no outings." I didn't argue, I just lowered my head. Because I knew nothing I said would change the truth. My mother didn't want me anymore. A year later, I was abandoned again. I had thought that no matter how harsh Aunt Margaret was, she would still keep me, because after all, I was her blood. But I was wrong. One winter morning, as I was washing dishes after breakfast, Aunt Margaret called me into the living room. She sat upright in her chair, hands clasped together, her gaze as cold as ever. But this time something felt different. "Ruby, we need to talk." I stood still, my hands still wet, a sinking feeling growing in my chest. "Do you know why you're still here?" she asked, her voice calm but calculated. I swallowed hard. "Because my mom sent me here." Aunt Margaret gave a slight nod. "That's right. And she also sent money to take care of you." My heart sank. I knew I was about to hear something I didn't want to. But she stopped. "There hasn't been a single payment since last month." It felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath me. "You mean," I stammered. Aunt Margaret crossed her arms. "No money means no reason to keep you here." Those words cut deeper than all the insults I had endured over the past year. So, that was all I was to them, just an expense? Nothing more? Nothing less? I fought back tears, my voice unsteady. "So, where am I supposed to go?" Aunt Margaret shrugged, as if this had nothing to do with her. "I could send you to a foster center, or, if you're lucky, you could stay with your grandmother." Grandmother. I hadn't seen her in years. In my memories, she was a quiet woman with sharp eyes and neatly tied silver hair. She had always seemed distant, but never as cold as my mother or Aunt Margaret. I had no other choice. "I want to go to Grandma's," I said, my voice small but firm. Aunt Margaret nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Then pack your things. You're leaving tomorrow morning." I packed in silence. No one helped me. No one asked if I was okay. It was just me, my worn-out suitcase, and the hollow emptiness in my chest. The next morning, Aunt Margaret drove me to a small town where my grandmother lived. Her house was smaller than I had imagined, with a front yard and climbing rose bushes along a wooden fence. She was already waiting at the door, watching me closely. Aunt Margaret stepped out of the car. No hug, no goodbye. She simply looked at my grandmother and said curtly, "Here's your granddaughter, I'm not keeping her anymore." Grandmother looked at me. Then she nodded. "Come inside, Ruby." And for the first time in years, I felt like I had a place to return to. The first few days at my grandmother's house, I wasn't used to the quiet. There were no harsh rules like at Aunt Margaret's. No cold complaints like Victor's. No one reminding me that I was a burden. Grandmother wasn't the affectionate type, nor did she say sweet words. But she had her own way of showing care. Breakfast was always set on the table, with a warm glass of milk and toast. Whenever I made a mistake, she didn't scold me. "Do it right, Ruby, everyone here has their responsibility." For the first time in years, I no longer felt like I was walking on eggshells. One evening, about 3 months after I moved in, she called me into the living room. A stack of papers sat on the table. I sat down, looking at her in confusion. She pushed the documents toward me. "I want to adopt you, legally." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be fine. You don't have to." "I know you're strong, Ruby. she interrupted. But being strong doesn't mean you have to be alone. I don't want anyone deciding your fate, again. She looked at me, her gaze firm yet warm. I am your family. And I'll prove it in the most official way. I couldn't stop my tears. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. After officially becoming her adopted daughter, I set a goal for myself. I would never make her regret choosing me. I threw myself into my studies, spending more time in the library than anywhere else. Grandmother never pressured me to be at the top of my class, but she always reminded me, you don't study for grades, you study for the life you deserve. She was the first to notice my passion for science. When I told her I wanted to pursue medicine, she simply nodded. Then study even harder. And I did. I spent hours every night reading, practicing, preparing for college entrance exams. When the acceptance letter from a prestigious medical school arrived, along with a scholarship, I screamed so loud that grandmother pretended to go deaf. "Well done, Ruby," she said, her eyes filled with pride. "Now pack your things. You have a future waiting." Medical school was tough, but I never gave up. I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the person who believed in me when no one else did. Years later, as I stood in a hospital, holding my oncology degree in my hands, I finally understood. This was the life I had fought for. Grandmother passed away on a crisp October morning as the last golden leaves fell onto the porch. I had known for months that her health was fading. I'd seen the signs, the slower steps, the lingering coughs, the way her hugs grew lighter, as if she was slowly slipping away. But no matter how much I'd prepared, I wasn't ready. I had just returned home from a long shift at the hospital when the call came. The doctor's voice was gentle, but heavy. "We're so sorry, Ruby. Your grandmother passed in her sleep." I cried all night. Not because I hadn't expected it, but because I didn't want to believe it was real. She was the only one who had never abandoned me. And now, she was gone too. The funeral was simple, just as she had wanted. I called the few remaining relatives in her contact list, but I didn't expect much. Most sent hollow condolences. I thought the funeral would pass in quiet solitude. But then, my old family showed up. They arrived on the last day, just after I had seen the final guest out. When I opened the door, I saw my mother standing there, with Victor and Kara, the half-sister I had never truly known. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't happy either. I just stood there, looking at them. My mother didn't beat around the bush. She spoke immediately. Not to ask how I was, but to make demands. "Ruby, we need to talk about my mother's estate." I let out a quiet laugh, devoid of warmth. "My grandmother." "My mother," I corrected. "She was the one who adopted me. I think that's clear." My mother tightened her grip on her purse, but it was Victor who spoke next. "No matter what the paperwork says, this is still family property. We all have a right to it." I crossed my arms, staring straight at him. "Family, is that the word you're choosing to use with me, Victor?" Kara, the little sister I never truly had the chance to be an older sister to, suddenly chimed in, her voice sweet but laced with deceit. "Come on, sis, why are you being so difficult? We're all family. Don't you want to share?" I laughed again, this time with a bitter edge. "Share? After all of you abandoned me when I was 8? No one answered right away. I turned to my mother, waiting to see what she would say. She simply sighed, her voice filled with annoyance. "Ruby, don't be selfish." This time, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Selfish?" I raised an eyebrow. "Who's really selfish here? The one who threw away her own daughter for a stranger? The one who only remembers me when money is involved?" I picked up a folder from the nearby table and flipped to the most important page. My grandmother's will. "Here are the legal documents. Everything belongs to me. If you bother me again, I'll call the police." Victor clenched his jaw. My mother glared. Kara pouted, but none of them could argue. I stepped toward the door and pulled it open. "You can leave now." 3 days later, I got a call from a neighbor. "Ruby, your family is moving into your house." I gripped my phone, my heart dropping. No way. I drove home as fast as I could, my stomach churning with anger. When I pulled up to the house, the sight in front of me made my blood run cold. My mother, Victor, and Kara were shamelessly carrying things into my home. Suitcases, cardboard boxes, even a small couch were being hauled through the front door. My door. My house. The home my grandmother left me. I took a deep breath and stormed inside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I snapped. My mother turned around, her expression completely calm. "We're just getting settled, Ruby. Don't make a scene." Victor stood with his arms crossed, his gaze challenging. "We're family. You can't expect to keep this house all to yourself forever." I felt my blood boil. "Family?" I scoffed coldly. "You abandoned me twice, and now you think you can just waltz in and take over my house?" Kara brushed past me, setting a box down. "You're so uptight. There's plenty of room for all of us." I clenched my fists. Enough. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. Right in front of them. My mother's eyes widened. "Ruby, what do you think you're doing?" "Calling the cops," I said, my voice like steel. "Because this is my house. And you're trespassing." Victor took a step forward, his expression darkening. "You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. 15 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. I stepped outside, calmly explaining the situation and presenting my legal documents. One of the officers turned to my mother. "Ma'am, you have no legal right to be here. You and your family need to leave immediately." My mother stiffened, staring at me. "You're really going to kick your own mother out?" I met her gaze head on. "You kicked me out a long time ago. This is just justice." Kara glanced around, realizing they had no way out. "This is humiliating," she muttered. Victor gritted his teeth, but as the officer stepped closer, he raised his hands in surrender, grabbing his suitcase and heading toward the door. My mother was the last to leave. Before stepping outside, she turned to look at me one last time. "Ruby, you'll regret this." I crossed my arms, standing firm. "No. The only thing I regret is loving someone who never deserved it, but not anymore." The door shut behind them. I stood in the empty house, letting out a long, steady breath. This was the end. It was finally over. The house returned to its peaceful state once the door closed. I stood in the living room, taking in the silence. No more fake pleasantries. No more accusations. No more demands. Just me and the memories of my grandmother. I slowly walked over to the old armchair by the window, the one she used to sit in every morning, sipping tea as she looked out at the garden. She once told me, "Ruby, it doesn't matter where you come from or who has left you. What matters is who you choose to become." I smiled softly. She was right. I was no longer the abandoned 8-year-old, no longer the lost girl seeking approval from a family that never deserved me. I had built my own path, become a doctor, become strong, and now, I had a real home. In the days that followed, I began restoring the house. I cleaned each old piece of furniture, organized my grandmother's keepsakes, and spent time tending to the little garden she had loved so much. At night I sat on the front porch, watching the warm streetlights cast a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. I didn't feel lonely. I realized that family isn't about shared blood. It's about the people who truly love and protect you. My family wasn't the one that abandoned me. It wasn't my mother, Victor, or Kara. My family was my grandmother, the one who chose to love me, who chose to stand by me when no one else did. And now, I was choosing to move forward, no longer haunted by the past, no longer weighed down by old wounds. I was choosing my future. A new life in this house. A place that once held pain, but would now only hold love and peace. Ruby's story is a powerful reminder that family isn't defined by blood, but by love and loyalty. Not everyone is fortunate enough to receive unconditional love from their biological parents, but that doesn't determine our worth. True strength comes not from clinging to those who hurt us, but from letting go and building our own lives. The past may be painful, but we always have the power to choose how we move forward. With resilience, self-respect, and an unyielding pursuit of happiness. What do you think of Ruby's story? If you've ever experienced something similar or have thoughts on family and independence, share your perspective in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful stories about life and family. I've never been able to forget that feeling, like I didn't quite belong in my own home. It wasn't an obvious kind of coldness, but something quieter. Something that gnawed at me from the inside out. The way I was ignored, as if my existence was just a dull gray background to someone else's bright shining picture. "She's not going to get very far," my mother once said, when she thought I wasn't listening. And that she was me. Maya. My sister, the one around whom our entire household seemed to revolve, was named Lauren. Only 2 years older than me, but I always felt like I was growing up under her endlessly long shadow. A shadow that could talk, smile charmingly, and make people believe it was the only thing worth looking up to. We lived in the suburbs of Oregon, in an old 2-story house my parents always proudly called our home. My dad owned a small auto repair shop in town, while my mom stayed at home and occasionally took sewing orders. Life wasn't lavish, but it wasn't exactly lacking either. At least not for Lauren. She had all the latest things. Real Converse sneakers. A brand new iPhone every time Apple released one. And me? I got her hand-me-downs, or things slightly broken, like a phone with a long crack across the screen that was still usable. I didn't envy material things. Or at least, I thought I didn't. But what hurt more was the difference in how my parents treated us. Every time Lauren got a good grade, we had a little celebration. Dad would bring home pizza and Mom would bake an apple pie. I once got an A on my history presentation, and all I received was a curt remark from Mom. "Keep it up, just don't let your grade slip." I did well in school, not outstanding but always hardworking. I joined the school eco club, even organized a book drive for the local library. But to my parents, none of that seemed worth mentioning, when Lauren was captain of the cheer team, had won a partial scholarship to a summer dance camp, and was the pride of the whole family. When relatives came over, Mom would go on and on about Lauren's achievements. Meanwhile, I'd sit in the kitchen peeling fruit, listening as my name was forgotten, like I'd never even existed in this so-called perfect family picture. I still remember it clearly. Once, I was selected to participate in a statewide writing competition. Only 5 students from our school were chosen. I was so excited to bring home the notice, hoping for praise. But just as I started to speak, Mom cut me off. "Lauren has a performance coming up at the art center, are you going?" I got this letter. "Later, okay? I'm busy sewing your sister's dress." The letter sat on the table, weighed down by a grocery ad, and somehow ended up in the trash. I don't even know when. My dad was different. He didn't say much, but when he spoke about me, there was always a note of disappointment in his voice. "Maya, you need to be more realistic. Not everyone's got that standout quality like Lauren. You should learn a trade, something stable. I can teach you how to fix cars. No need to chase dreams." I'd heard words like that so often, they stopped hurting. They just made me tired. I was never encouraged to dream big. While Lauren was sent to expensive summer camps, I was told to learn to be independent. That the world out there wasn't kind to people who weren't exceptional. Every time I brought up my dream of going to college, my mom would shake her head. "You should consider something practical, like hairdressing or being a nail tech. It's more realistic and doesn't cost much." I used to believe them. I believed I wasn't good enough, that being forgotten was somehow my fault. But the scariest part was when you start telling yourself, maybe they're right. It wasn't until much later that I realized. It wasn't that I was ordinary. They just never wanted to see me clearly. I still remember the day Lauren got her college acceptance letter like it was yesterday. The moment she tore open that envelope and shouted, "I got into UCLA!" The entire house exploded with joy. Mom hugged her, eyes brimming with tears. Dad was speechless, just clapped her on the back and said a sentence I'll never forget. "We've been preparing for this day for a long time." That night, they threw a party in the backyard. Relatives, neighbors, friends, everyone was invited. There was a 3-tiered cake, string lights glowing along the fence, and even a live country band. Dad hired a photographer to capture the turning point in Lauren's life. I stood off to the side, holding a warm can of soda, watching my sister shine in a brand new cobalt blue dress. Mom's favorite color. "She's going to change the future of this family," Mom said to Aunt Ruth as they watched Lauren laugh with her friends. "We've been saving since the day she was born." I was 17 then, a senior in high school. I had applied to a few community colleges and even one state university out of state. I wasn't aiming high, I just wanted a chance. One time to be supported, to be believed in. I waited until one evening when Dad was watching the news, and Mom was folding laundry, my heart pounding like it would burst. I held out the acceptance letter from Arizona State University. Not a prestigious school, but one that had the business program I wanted to pursue. "Mom, Dad, I just got my acceptance letter," I began, holding out the paper. I really want to go. I just need help covering the first semester. After that, I'll get a job to pay the rest." Mom didn't look at the paper, she just glanced at me over the stack of folded t-shirts. "Maya, be realistic, college isn't for everyone." "But I got in." "It's not even a good school. Besides, do you really think you're cut out for it?" She folded a shirt sharply like she was packing her irritation into every crease. I turned to Dad, still holding on to hope. "I could take out a student loan, I'll pay back every cent, I promise, I'll work, I'll save. Whatever it takes." Dad didn't take his eyes off the screen, he just said, flatly, "My parents don't take out loans. That's a principle. Our family has never borrowed from anyone, and we're not starting because of you." I was speechless. "But you've been saving for Lauren for over 10 years. She has a clear goal, she has achievements, she deserves it," my mother said, her voice sharp as a knife. "What about me? Don't I deserve it? You should think about a stable job. Your father still needs help at the shop. The pay isn't bad. And there's no debt involved. Everyone needs an honest job, Maya." I felt like I was falling into a black hole. No rope, no one reaching out. I left the living room, legs heavy, still clutching the now crumpled acceptance letter. The bedroom door closed behind me, like a gate, locking away the last bit of hope I ever had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring out the dark window, thinking about all the years I had tried. The late-night studying, the extracurriculars I joined, the encouragement from teachers. But turned out, it was all a joke in my parents' eyes. The next morning I woke up with a new determination. If my parents didn't believe in me, I'd find someone who did. I had only one place to go: my grandparents. I went to their house on a gloomy Friday afternoon, carrying a backpack and a broken heart. The little wooden house on the edge of town where I'd once spent peaceful childhood summers had become my last thread of hope. My grandma opened the door, worry filling her eyes when she saw my tear-stained face. "Maya, what happened, sweetie?" I couldn't say anything for the first few minutes, every word shattered in my throat. When I sat down at the kitchen table, clutching the warm glass of water she handed me, the tears broke free again. "I got my college acceptance letter," I choked out. "But my parents, they refused to help. They said I'm not cut out for college. They told me I should be a waitress instead." Grandma placed her hand on my shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze without saying a word. As I told the whole story, even how I'd begged to take out a loan with a legal contract, how they'd saved for Lauren for over a decade but not a single cent for me, my grandpa had quietly taken a seat across the table, his expression darkening. He was a man of few words, but when he finally spoke, his voice was deep and resolute. "I'll be damned if I let you give up your dream just because some adults don't know how to be fair." "But you don't have money," I whispered, guilt creeping in. "If it's not there, we'll make it," he said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. "The old house in Eugene is still there, land passed down from my father, but if selling it means buying your future, then it's worth it." I was stunned. That house was where they used to live before retirement. It wasn't big, but to them it was a lifetime. The thought of them giving it up for me made my chest ache. I can't let you do that. You can, Grandma cut in, holding my hand. You have to, because you deserve this, and because your parents are wrong. The following week passed like a whirlwind. Grandpa contacted a realtor, took me to the bank, then to a lawyer to ensure everything was handled properly. When he signed the sale contract, I noticed his hand trembling slightly. I bit my lip to hold back tears. I'll pay it back. I'll work so hard, I promise. You don't owe us a thing, he smiled. But if one day you succeed, just remember this place will always be home. I enrolled in a public university in Denver, majoring in investment management. I chose the farthest place possible so I wouldn't have to see my family during the holidays. From the day I got on that bus and left town, I never called my parents, and no one called me. Lauren didn't text. Mom didn't ask. Dad, the one who used to teach me how to fix my bike, was just a faded shadow in my memory. College was a long stretch of freedom and loneliness. I worked part-time at the library, then later at a cafe near the dorms. Every dollar I earned, I saved, not to send home, but to prove I could live without them. I studied day and night. I volunteered for every project, every workshop. I knew I didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. Whenever I felt exhausted, I looked at the old photo of me with Grandma and Grandpa in front of the house in Eugene. The house that had become my tuition. 4 years flew by. I graduated with honors, standing on the stage to receive my diploma, with no one from my family in the audience. Only a call from Grandma that morning, saying, "Today, you made us prouder than anyone ever has." After graduation, I returned to the city, full of hope, applying to every job I could find. With my academic record, internship experience, and extracurriculars, I thought I'd land a stable job quickly. But life wasn't as easy as the theories in my investment textbooks. 3 weeks passed, then 7, then 2 months. All I got were rejection emails. Some said I lacked practical experience. Others said they were hiring internally. One day I had 3 interviews back to back, and came home so exhausted I collapsed on the floor, still clutching my resume. I started to worry. The savings I had left after 4 years of college were running out. I took on small jobs, data entry, part-time assistant, and kept asking myself, were my parents right? Was I not cut out for this path? But every time that thought crossed my mind, I remembered the look in Grandpa's eyes when he signed the papers to sell the house. No, I couldn't let their sacrifice be for nothing. I would keep going, no matter what. In the 3rd month after graduation, I got a call from a small investment firm called Crescent Capital, located on the 3rd floor of an old office building in the Denver suburbs. At that point, I had no other options. My savings were nearly gone, bills were piling up, and I felt abandoned by the very industry I'd once believed would change my life. The interview lasted just 15 minutes. The HR manager, a balding man named Rob, glanced through my resume and said, "We need someone to do market analysis. Starting pay is $2,500 a month pre-tax. No quarterly bonuses, no raises in the first 6 months. Do you accept?" I nodded immediately. I had nothing to negotiate with. All I could think was, it doesn't matter where I start, as long as I don't stop. Every morning, I caught the 6:15 bus and arrived at the office before everyone else to read market reports. My desk was near the women's restroom, the chair had a broken backrest, and the computer screen only lit up after a few taps. But I didn't complain. I took notes on everything, asked for more work, volunteered for reports others avoided. I learned to read data like it was the language of money. One October afternoon, while I was buried in tech stock numbers, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Alina Tran, my college roommate who had majored in international finance. I hadn't heard from her since graduation. "Maya," her voice rang with excitement. "I'm working at Maxwell Investment Group. They just opened a new branch in Denver. HR's looking for someone who's strong in analysis and can handle pressure. I already gave them your resume. I was stunned. Maxwell was the dream of every investment management student, one of the biggest financial firms in the country. For the first time in months, my heart beat fast, not from anxiety, but from hope. A week later, I stood in front of Maxwell's temporary office downtown floors, so polished you could see your reflection, employees dressed like they'd just stepped out of Forbes magazine. The interview lasted over 2 hours, with 3 consecutive rounds. They asked everything, from macro investment strategies to how I'd respond if I lost a client $10 million. I answered each question, pulling from everything I had learned at Crescent. A week later, I got the acceptance email, with the contract attached. Starting salary $7,800 per month, plus quarterly bonuses, full benefits, and international training opportunities. I read that email over and over, tears falling before I even realized. I submitted my resignation at Crescent. No one tried to stop me, no one said goodbye. But I wasn't bitter. That was just the starting line. At Maxwell, I became a machine that never stopped. While others clocked out at 5 p.m., I stayed until 9, diving into analysis, proposing strategies, learning new investment algorithms. My first assignment was managing a portfolio for a mid-size healthcare company. 3 months later, I helped them achieve a 32% growth, far exceeding initial expectations. My name started coming up in senior strategy meetings. "How did you do it?" the department head Mr. Hansen asked during my performance review. "I don't allow myself to fail," I answered without hesitation. My first quarterly bonus was $28,000, a number that once felt like a far-off dream. I moved out of my cramped suburban apartment and bought a high-rise condo in Skyline Ridge, with a balcony facing the Rocky Mountains and polished walnut floors. A few months later, I put a down payment on my dream car, a sleek black BMW X5, and drove it straight to my grandparents' house. When Grandpa stepped into the yard, his eyes flicked from the car to me, lips moving but no words coming out. "I want you to keep the car, it's a gift," I said, placing the keys in his hand. "I wouldn't be here today without you both." Grandma hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. And Grandpa, usually so reserved, couldn't hide the tears shimmering in his eyes. But I knew the journey wasn't over. This first taste of success was just the foundation. I hadn't forgotten the looks that dismissed me, the words that broke me from within. And I hadn't forgiven. I was sitting in my office, in a high-packed black leather chair, golden afternoon light casting long shadows across my desk, when the phone rang. The caller ID read, "Lauren." I stared at the blinking name for a long moment, 1,000 questions running through my mind. The last time I heard her voice was 4 years ago, when I stood at our doorstep begging to go to college. She glanced at me once, then turned back to finish her makeup. I picked up the phone. "Maya, oh my God, your voice sounds so different. I didn't think you still used this number." Lauren's voice was sweet like syrup, but to me, it smelled like expired perfume. "What do you want?" I cut her off, not in the mood for small talk. "I, just wanted to invite you to dinner this weekend. The whole family will be there. There's something important we need to discuss." I stayed silent for a few seconds. There was something in her tone that made me cautious, but then I nodded. Partly out of curiosity, partly because I wanted to look them in the eye, the people who once looked down on me. For the first time, from a position that was equal, if not higher. Saturday night, I arrived at Maple Grove Bistro, a fancy restaurant downtown. I wore a simple cream-colored fitted dress, light makeup, and the black heels I bought for myself after my first quarterly bonus. When I walked in, my mother's eyes scanned me like an X-ray, while my father just gave a small nod. Lauren, of course, looked like a movie star. She wore a wine-red dress, matching nail polish, and sat beside a man I'd never seen, the typical Wall Street lawyer type, with a tailored suit and an arrogant expression. "This is Brandon, your sister's fiancé," my mother said, like it was the most important news on earth. I nodded. Brandon didn't shake my hand, just gave a smug smile. Dinner went on with obvious pretension. They asked a few questions about my job, faked admiration when they heard Maxwell Investment Group, then quickly shifted to the real topic, the one they clearly cared about more. "We're planning the wedding for May," Mom began, smiling politely. "At Evergreen Country Club, you know the place, Maya. Very prestigious. We've agreed to split the cost with Brandon's family," Dad added, swirling his wine glass. "The total cost is around $300,000. I nodded. Quietly cut a piece of salmon on my plate. I knew what was coming. "The thing is," Mom glanced at me, her fingers gently tapping her wineglass, "our portion isn't quite enough. And since you're doing so well, we thought—" $150,000, I cut her off, lifting my gaze. "You want me to give $150,000 to fund my sister's wedding?" The air at the table instantly thickened. "Alone," Dad said quickly. "Just a loan, sweetheart. We'll sign papers, do everything properly. The whole family believes in you." "Believes in me?" I let out a cold laugh, sharp like glass. "Like how you believed in me when I begged for college tuition, when I pleaded for a legally binding loan, and Mom said, 'This family doesn't borrow money.'" My mother's face turned from red to pale. Brandon looked down at his phone. Lauren suddenly leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Maya, you're being ridiculous. This is my wedding. If you won't help your own sister, the only one in the family with a real future, then who will you help?" I set my knife and fork down, slowly dabbed my lips with the napkin and stood up. "I built everything from zero. None of you helped. None of you asked how I was doing. And now, because you want a $300,000 wedding, I'm supposed to open my wallet? No, I'm not funding the dreams of people who once told me I wasn't worth it." "Maya, you'll never be like me," Lauren yelled as I walked away. I turned back, smiling, the restaurant lights catching in my eyes like steel. "I don't need to be like you. I'm living a life you never had the guts to dream of." That night, my phone rang non-stop. I didn't answer. The next morning, I got a text from Lauren. "You ungrateful, selfish bitch. You think you're better than everyone? You're just a money-hungry nobody with no family. You'll die alone." I read it, then deleted it, no reply. Because for the first time I realized my silence was worth more than any comeback. Less than 3 days after that awful dinner, Grandpa called me. His voice was rough with anger, but still sharp enough to avoid cursing. A rare thing when he was truly mad. "Maya, your father just called me." I froze, my heart jumped. "What do they want now?" "Money," he said, voice like a knife's edge. "They asked if Grandma and I would sell the car you gave us. Said, a luxury car like that could cover the whole wedding." I asked him back, "Are you out of your damn mind?" I gripped the phone tighter, my chest tightening. "They seriously brought that up?" "Not only did they bring it up," he said, "they acted like it was the most logical thing in the world. Your mom said she doesn't need to show off like that to her old grandparents. What, the car's for grocery runs? Or to impress the neighbors?" Hearing that felt like swallowing ice. "What did you do?" I asked. "I hung up," he replied without hesitation, then blocked the number. I was quiet for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. But one thing I knew. At least in this world, there were still 2 people who had never turned their backs on me. A week later, rumors started spreading through town like a toxic wind blowing across the fields. At the weekend farmers market where Grandma usually bought vegetables, one of her old friends came up and said, straight to her face, "I heard Maya's all high and mighty now? Got rich and looks down on her whole family, never visits, never invites anyone to her place. What kind of life is that?" Grandma told me about it later, her eyes red with frustration. "They talk like you're some heartless girl who abandoned her family for money. They don't know. They don't know anything. The thought—" "I know." I held her hand. "And I don't need them to know, as long as you and Grandpa know the truth." But it didn't stop there. One night I got a message from Aunt Melinda, my dad's younger sister, someone I used to be close to when I was a kid. Maya, I heard from your mom, they're really hurt. They say you refuse to help just because of the past. I hope you're not letting success cloud your heart. I closed the phone and scoffed. It wasn't success that blinded me, it was the way they only came back when I had something they wanted that opened my eyes. The next day I went for a walk with Grandma and Grandpa at the park behind their building. Grandma brought an old checkered blanket, Grandpa brought hot coffee, and I carried a small camera to take a few portraits. We sat on the grass, watching ducks swim across the quiet lake. "You're not going to explain?" Grandpa asked. "To who?" I replied. "To that flock of vultures circling around, listening to one side and spreading garbage like gospel." I shook my head. People believe what they want to believe. No matter what I say, they'll twist it to suit the person they're used to pitying. "My girl," Grandma said softly, "sometimes silence is an answer. But if it lasts too long, it starts to sound like agreement." I knew she was right. But I also knew I had been through enough to understand this. I no longer owed anyone the burden of justifying their cruelty. A week later, I stopped by the supermarket near their place. As I was bagging tomatoes, I heard a voice behind me, loud enough for me to catch. "That's her. I heard she's loaded now, but won't give her family a single penny. Her poor mom cried her eyes out while she lives in a fancy penthouse." I turned around and locked eyes with Mrs. Clara, an old friend of my mom's. She looked flustered, but didn't apologize. I stared straight at her, said nothing, then turned and walked away. But inside I felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness, but a calm, deliberate indifference. For the first time, I felt light. Like I didn't have to carry the weight of trying to make others understand me anymore. Because the truth was known by the only people that mattered. And they were walking right beside me. Slow but steady. Like they always had been. I was sipping my espresso in the quiet of my penthouse on a Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not on the weekend, which I reserved for peace, for stillness, for zero drama. I got up, opened the door, and froze for a second. Lauren. She wore a beige silk dress, a designer bag slung over her shoulder, and makeup done like she was headed to a press conference, not to beg. "Maya," she tried to smile. "Do you have a few minutes?" I folded my arms across my chest, blocking the entrance. "What are you doing here?" "To talk," she said softly, trying to sound gentle. "This can't go on forever. We're sisters after all." I silently opened the door wider and pointed to the living room. "Come in." "But, you only have 5 minutes." Lauren stepped inside, her eyes drifting over the walnut floors, the framed artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city. I didn't need to look at her to know what she was thinking. "This place is beautiful. Do you live here alone?" "Get to the point," I said, sitting down in the armchair across from her. She sat sideways, trying to keep her tone soft. "Maya, I know things went too far, but you have to understand. Mom is heartbroken. She can't sleep. Dad's stressing himself gray. They already put down the deposit for the venue, hired a wedding planner, sent out invitations. If they can't come up with the rest now, they'll be humiliated in front of Brandon's family." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my voice flat as a still lake on a cold night. "A lot, actually," Lauren snapped, then quickly lowered her voice. "If my family doesn't pay the rest, Brandon's side will look down on us. They'll think we're poor and don't know how to maintain our dignity. So what they think is their problem." "Maya, please. This is about the family's honor." I stood up and walked to the window. The city sparkled below, each high-rise like a pillar I had built with my own blood and tears. Honor. When I was on my knees begging to go to college, what did they give me? A cold rejection. When my grandparents had to sell their house and land, they didn't even blink. When I succeeded, the only thing they remembered wasn't me, it was my bank account. "Maya, I know, but..." "No. You don't know anything." I turned around, looking straight into the eyes of the woman once celebrated by the whole family like a queen, now sitting on my couch, flustered and humiliated. "You don't know I lived off instant noodles for 3 months because I was scared I'd run out of money. You don't know I had to work 2 jobs just to pay for tuition. And you definitely don't know that every time I visited Grandma and Grandpa, I had to hear the neighbors call me the ungrateful child." Lauren bit her lip, speechless. I stepped forward and pointed to the door. "Leave this house, and don't ever come back. I'm no longer the family's wallet. I'm no longer the little sister hiding in your shadow. I am Maya, the woman who built her life from zero, while your entire family threw me off a cliff. Maya, you'll regret this. You don't know what you're doing." Her voice trembled, but it wasn't from guilt. It was from anger. I opened the door. "I have no regrets, but you will for losing the only person in the family who suffered in silence and asked for nothing in return." She stood up, walked past me, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her, leaving no impression other than pure pretense. When the door clicked shut behind her, I stood still for a moment, listening to her high heels fading down the empty hallway. I sat down, my hands slightly trembling, not from regret, but because for the first time in my life I had just shut out a blood relative without feeling an ounce of guilt. And I knew that was the sign of freedom. 1 week after Lauren left my apartment in defeat, a message from my old college friend Alina popped up on my phone, with the caption, "Hot gossip. Lauren's wedding got downgraded, her parents couldn't pay their share, and the groom's family called them out. Big drama at the Riviera Club." I read it without surprise. Everything built on greed and lies eventually collapses. According to Elena, during the pre-wedding party at the country club, the kind reserved for the region's so-called elite, my parents were pulled aside by Brandon's mother for a conversation. They had to admit they couldn't pay what they promised. In a room full of candlelight, wine glasses and soft piano music, the truth dropped like a boulder. Brandon's mother, as described, didn't need to raise her voice to show contempt. A single glance from her could freeze the room, and that's exactly what she did. Elena said her look was like spotting a stain on her silk gloves. The wedding still happened, but not at the Evergreen Country Club. The luxury venue was replaced with a smaller banquet hall on the outskirts. The custom gown was swapped for a cheaper model, half the floral arrangements were cut, and most notably, the grand bridal procession was cancelled. I didn't receive an invitation, obviously. My grandparents did, though. A card that arrived late with no note, no phone call. We stared at it on the breakfast table, like it was a piece of misplaced paper. "Are we going?" I asked, voice soft as a breeze. Grandpa just sipped his coffee and shook his head. "You think that invitation shows any real intention?" Grandma gave a sad smile. "They sent it out of formality, but we don't live by formality." And so, on the day Lauren walked down the aisle in a discounted wedding dress with a forced smile, I spread a red and white checkered picnic blanket with Grandma and Grandpa on the lawn behind their house. Grandma made my favorite egg salad. Grandpa brought out a bottle of old wine from her 60th birthday. "To you," Grandpa said, raising his glass. "To what?" I laughed. "To the fact that you didn't become part of that fake family." We ate, laughed, shared stories from the past, while birds sang in the trees and sunlight spilled over the distant hills. No classical music, no glowing candles, just genuine warmth. Something I'd never felt at any so-called family gathering before. That night I received a photo from a friend who worked for the event company. A side-angle shot of Lauren and Brandon posing with my parents. My mom's face was stiff, her smile like it had been glued on. My dad stood like a statue, hands limp at his sides, eyes avoiding the camera. The groom's family looked polite, but cold. Like actors in a play no one wanted to be in. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel smug. I just felt relieved. Like a painful chapter had truly come to an end. Since that day, I've had no further contact with them. My parents' numbers are blocked. Lauren never messaged again. I don't care what they say, what rumors they spread, or what stories they tell their relatives. Those who still believe them, I no longer need to keep. I kept working, I kept rising. The following month, I was promoted to lead strategic analyst at Maxwell. I moved to a new apartment in Highgate Hills, complete with a rooftop pool and 24/7 gym. Each morning I wake up to sunlight filtering through the curtains, brew coffee in my marble kitchen, and listen to whatever music I want. No more yelling, no more demands to be realistic. Each evening, I decide what to eat, what to read, what to do. No one schedules my life anymore. I, Maya, live a life I once thought only existed in dreams. A life that doesn't need anyone's approval. A life where I don't have to ask permission to be myself. And the most beautiful part of all, I no longer hurt when I think of my family. Because I built my own. From my grandparents' love, my own two hands, and the strength it took to say no at the right time. My story isn't just about a journey from darkness to light, it's proof that sometimes, family isn't where love lives. I learned to rise from being overlooked, to stop being the backup plan in my own home. My success didn't come from luck. It came from cutting off what was toxic. Now, I live the life I chose, unashamed, unbowed, and completely free. What do you think of Maya's decision? Was she too harsh, or was it the protection she needed? Share your thoughts below. And don't